The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee fills the air, mingling with the buttery scent of croissants just pulled from the oven. Sunlight filters through the cafe's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. The place has a cozy charm, rustic tables, soft jazz humming from the speakers, and baristas working behind the counter with rehearsed efficiency. Daniel Carter watches the scene unfold from his seat in the corner, unnoticed. He takes a slow sip of his black coffee, its bitterness grounding him in the moment. Dressed in a simple button-up and jeans, he blends in, just another customer stopping by for a caffeine fix. No one in the cafe would ever guess the truth. He's not just here for coffee. Daniel owns Bean and Brew, a successful cafe chain, and this location, tucked in a gentrifying neighborhood, has been on his radar for weeks. Complaints have been piling up. Subtle, troubling ones. Customers of color being treated with less warmth. Orders for black patrons taking longer. A certain employee, Brian, developing a reputation for being selectively rude. It's nothing outright illegal, just quiet, corrosive discrimination. The kind that festers and spreads if left unchecked. So, Daniel decided to see for himself. No grand entrance. No cameras. No warnings. Just him, slipping in like any regular customer, watching, listening. A bell chimes as the door swings open. A black woman in her mid-30s steps inside, dressed in business casual, pressed slacks, a blazer, and a silk scarf neatly tied around her neck. She moves with the quiet confidence of someone who knows her worth. Daniel clocks it immediately, the shift behind the counter. The cashier, a young white man with a name tag reading Brian, stiffens. His cheerful banter with a group of white college students dies the moment his gaze lands on the woman. He doesn't greet her. Doesn't smile. Instead, he leans an elbow on the counter, his expression flat, almost bored. The woman hesitates for half a second, like she's used to this. Then she steps forward, chin high. "Good morning," she says, her voice polite but firm. "Can I get a medium latte with oat milk?" Brian sighs, like she's asked him to make her a 5-course meal. He punches the order into the register without looking at her. "That'll be $6.75. "No, sure thing," like he'd said to the last customer. "No, coming right up." Just transactional indifference. Daniel's fingers tighten around his coffee cup. It's subtle, easy to dismiss. If someone called Brian out, he'd have excuses ready. "I'm just having a rough morning. I treat everyone the same." Maybe she's imagining it. But Daniel sees the difference. He's been a black man in too many rooms where the warmth drains the second he steps in. He recognizes the quiet way racism slithers into everyday interactions. And he's not letting this slide. He leans back, watching. Waiting. Because if this is how Brian acts in public, he can only imagine what happens when no one's watching. The cafe hums with quiet conversation, but Daniel isn't listening to any of it. His focus is locked on Brian. The barista doesn't bother to call out the woman's name when her latte is ready. Instead, he slides the cup onto the counter and turns away. The woman waits for a moment, then steps forward and checks the label. A tight frown forms on her lips. "This is whole milk," she says, voice steady. "I asked for oat milk." Brian exhales loudly, louder than necessary. "That's what I put in." "No," she replies, meeting his gaze. "I can taste the difference." Daniel watches as Brian barely suppresses an eye roll. His body language, tense shoulders, clenched jaw, radiates irritation, like he's being burdened by the request. With a slow, exaggerated motion, he takes the cup back. "I guess I'll remake it," he mutters. No apology. No acknowledgement of his mistake. Just quiet hostility. Daniel sets his coffee down, a slow anger unfurling in his chest. It's not just the bad service. It's the underlying message. You don't matter enough for me to care. The woman, to her credit, keeps her composure. But Daniel notices the way she presses her lips together, the way her fingers curl slightly at her sides. She's probably had this happen before. Too many times to count. Brian turns his back to start remaking the drink, but something catches Daniel's eye. The next customer in line, a young white woman, steps up, and Brian's entire demeanor changes. His face relaxes into an easy smile. Hey there. What can I get started for you? His voice is suddenly bright, friendly, like flipping a switch. Daniel clenches his jaw. It's not outright aggression. Not yelling. Not slurs. Just carefully controlled indifference, applied selectively. It's enough to make someone feel small, invisible, unwelcome. Daniel glances at the other employees behind the counter. A Latina barista making drinks. A white girl at the pastry station. Neither of them react. No one corrects Brian. Either they don't notice, or worse, they do and choose to ignore it. Brian hands the black woman her new drink with a tight, insincere smile. She thanks him anyway, turning to leave. But as she walks past Daniel, their eyes meet for the briefest moment. A flicker of silent understanding passes between them.
Yeah.
She noticed. Daniel's stomach tightens. He takes another sip of his coffee, eyes still on Brian. This wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. And if Brian acted like this when customers were watching, what happened when no one was? Daniel leans forward, decision made. He's staying. And he's about to find out just how deep this problem goes. Daniel doesn't leave. Instead, he settles in, watching the cafe's rhythm, taking in every interaction, every shift in tone. He doesn't have full proof yet, but his gut tells him this is deeper than just one bad encounter. And then it happens again. A black teenager steps up to the counter. He looks nervous, shifting on his feet as he scans the menu. Can I get a caramel frappe? Brian doesn't even glance up. You got cash. The boy blinks.
Yeah.
Why? Brian finally looks up, expression unreadable. Gotta make sure. We've had issues. Daniel's grip tightens on his coffee cup. Issues. He knows exactly what Brian's implying. The teenager fumbles out his wallet, shoulders slightly hunched. He hands over a 20, and Brian holds it up to the light, scrutinizing it like it's a potential counterfeit. Daniel's blood simmers. It's not what Brian is saying, it's how he's saying it. The message is clear: I don't trust you. You're suspicious. Yet, when the white woman behind the boy orders her drink and hands over a 20, Brian doesn't check hers. Doesn't even hesitate. Daniel exhales slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. This isn't just rudeness. It's targeted, deliberate. And he's about to put a stop to it. He stands, walking toward the counter just as the black teenager steps aside, stuffing his change into his pocket. Daniel places his hands on the counter. Excuse me. Brian glances up, clearly not recognizing him.
Yeah.
Daniel keeps his voice even. I couldn't help but notice you checked that boy's money, but not hers. He gestures toward the white woman now waiting for her drink. Why's that? Brian's face hardens instantly. It's policy, he says flatly. We check large bills sometimes. Only sometimes. Daniel tilts his head. Because I've been sitting here for a while, and I haven't seen you check anyone else's money. Just his. Brian's jaw tightens. Sir, I don't make the rules. Daniel doesn't miss the way he emphasizes sir, polite on the surface, but laced with barely concealed irritation. I'd love to see that rule in writing, Daniel says smoothly. Because if you're making up policies on the spot, that's a serious problem. The cafe is quieter now. People are starting to notice. Brian shifts, his fingers curling into fists. Look, if you have an issue, take it up with the manager. Daniel smiles. Oh, I plan to. He turns his head. Who's in charge here? A voice cuts in. That would be me. A woman in her late 30s steps forward, her name tag reading Megan, manager. She wears an impatient expression, already exasperated before she even hears the full story. Brian smirks slightly, like he knows he's about to be protected. What's the issue? Megan asks, crossing her arms. Daniel gestures toward Brian. Your employee has a habit of treating black customers differently. I just watched him scrutinize a black teenager's cash while taking a white customer's money without question. Before that, he showed blatant disrespect to a black woman who ordered a latte. Megan's eyes flick to Brian. Then she sighs, already dismissing it. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. Daniel raises an eyebrow. A pattern of misunderstandings? That's interesting. Megan shifts, visibly uncomfortable. I think you're reading into this too much. We don't tolerate discrimination here. Daniel folds his arms. Really? Because from what I've seen, it's happening in plain sight. Brian scoffs. This is ridiculous. I treat everyone the same. No, Daniel says, voice steady. You don't. The cafe is silent now. Even the customers are watching. Megan huffs. Sir, if you're unhappy, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere. Daniel gives her a long, assessing look. There it is. She's not interested in accountability. She's interested in shutting him up. He smiles, slow and knowing. I think I'll stay. Brian rolls his eyes. Oh, come on, man. What, you some kind of activist? Daniel tilts his head. Something like that. Then he pulls out his phone. He's been recording. Brian's smirk vanishes. Megan stiffens. Daniel keeps his voice calm, but his words land like a hammer. You see, I'm not just any customer. He pockets his phone, letting his next words sink in. I'm the owner of this entire chain. The blood drains from Brian's face. Megan's lips part in shock. The game has changed. And Daniel, he's just getting started. The cafe is dead silent. Brian's smirk has vanished, replaced with a look of confusion and, just beneath it, fear. Megan blinks rapidly, her arms unfolding as she tries to process what Daniel just said. You're what? She asks, a weak laugh escaping her lips. Daniel lets the words settle. I own Bean and Brew. This cafe. And about 30 others just like it. A beat passes. Then, Brian scoffs, crossing his arms. Yeah, right. Megan, on the other hand, recovers quickly, a forced smile appearing on her face. Okay, sir, let's not be dramatic. You're telling me you're the Daniel Carter. Her tone is condescending, like the idea itself is ridiculous. Daniel tilts his head slightly, studying her. There it is. That deep-seated disbelief. The assumption that a black man in a simple button-up and jeans couldn't possibly be the one in charge. I don't expect you to recognize me, he says, voice smooth, but I do expect you to recognize what happens next. Megan forces a tight laugh. All right, listen. Maybe you are who you say you are, but this is completely uncalled for. You're blowing things way out of proportion. Brian was just doing his job. Daniel raises an eyebrow. Was he? He pulls out his phone and taps the screen. Because I've got about 40 minutes of footage that says otherwise. Megan stiffens. Brian pales. You were recording? Brian stammers. Daniel nods. Every interaction. Every microaggression. Every time you conveniently forgot your customer service skills the moment a black person walked in. He turns to Megan. And every time you chose to ignore it. Megan's smile drops completely. Okay, let's not be hasty. Her voice shifts, no longer dismissive, but placating. I'm sure we can work something out. Daniel gives her a slow, unimpressed look. Work something out. Megan exhales sharply, glancing around the cafe. The customers are still watching. Some have their own phones out now, recording. Brian shakes his head, face twisted in anger. You can't just come in here and what? Daniel cuts him off. His voice is still calm, but now there's an edge to it. Hold you accountable. Call out what's blatantly happening here. Brian clenches his jaw, then sneers. Oh, come on, man. You're just trying to make a scene. You people are always playing the victim. A stunned silence falls over the cafe. Megan inhales sharply, eyes darting between Brian and Daniel. Brian, shut up. But it's too late. Daniel tilts his head. You people. His voice is deceptively soft, but the weight behind it is crushing. Brian realizes what he's just said. His mouth opens, then shuts. His face burns red. Daniel finally steps forward, closing the space between them. You want to talk about victims? His voice stays quiet, controlled. How about every black customer who came in here and got treated like less? How about that teenage boy who just wanted a damn frappe but had to prove he wasn't a thief first? Brian swallows hard but doesn't answer. Daniel turns to Megan. And you? His gaze pins her in place. You had every chance to step in, but instead, you protected this. He gestures toward Brian, his disgust evident. So tell me, how do you think corporate is going to respond to that? Megan finally breaks. Okay. All right. Look. She forces a nervous smile. Maybe there were some issues with how Brian handled things. But firing him on the spot isn't the answer. He's been a loyal employee. Daniel holds up a hand. Stop. Megan flinches. Daniel exhales slowly, shaking his head. Loyalty means nothing if it comes at the expense of the people we're supposed to serve. His voice drops, quieter but firm. And I don't run my business that way. He turns, scanning the cafe. Every customer is still watching. The black teenager from earlier is still in the corner, eyes wide. The black woman who ordered the oat milk latte has stayed too, her arms folded. They're waiting. Daniel makes sure his voice carries. Brian, you're fired. A sharp inhale comes from Megan. You can't just. I can, Daniel cuts in. And I am. His gaze locks onto her. And if you have a problem with that, Megan, I suggest you take it up with corporate. Megan pales. She knows what that means. Daniel looks back at Brian. Turn in your apron. No. Brian stands frozen, his face flickering between fury and panic. His gaze darts to Megan, expecting backup. But Megan is silent, her face tense. He has no power here. Slowly, stiffly, he yanks off his apron and slams it onto the counter. Then, with one last venomous glare, he storms toward the exit, shoving past customers as he goes. The door slams shut behind him. Daniel exhales. The weight in the air shifts. And then, applause. It starts with the black woman, slow and deliberate. Then the teenager joins in. Then a few more customers. Soon, the entire cafe is clapping, the tension finally breaking. Megan looks mortified. Daniel simply nods, then turns back to the counter. He isn't done yet. The applause fades, but the weight of what just happened still lingers in the air. Brian is gone. Fired. Humiliated. But Daniel isn't finished yet. He turns his attention back to Megan, who's still standing behind the counter, her hands clenched. The color has drained from her face, but she's trying to hold it together, trying to act like she's still in control. Megan, Daniel says, his voice even. Let's talk. She flinches slightly, but then forces a tight smile. Look, Mr. Carter, I understand you're upset, but I really don't think this is necessary. Brian was the issue, and he's gone now. She gestures vaguely toward the door, as if that should be the end of it. Daniel folds his arms. You don't think this is necessary? He lets the words hang for a second. You let this happen under your watch. You dismissed me the second I called it out. You only started backtracking when I told you who I was. Megan's jaw tightens. I didn't know who you were. Daniel gives a humorless chuckle. That's your excuse. He steps closer, lowering his voice just enough to make sure she feels the weight of his words. So, if I'd been just another black customer, you would have let this slide? Megan's mouth opens, then shuts. Daniel nods slowly. That's what I thought. She shakes her head quickly, her voice turning sharp. That's not fair. You're making it seem like I'm some kind of racist. Daniel exhales through his nose, keeping his patience. Megan, racism isn't just about slurs or violence. It's about what you allow to happen. What you ignore. Megan's eyes dart around the cafe. Customers are still watching. Employees are frozen behind the counter, unsure what to do. The silence is suffocating. She takes a step back. I need to call corporate. Daniel pulls out his phone. No need. I am corporate. Her face crumples slightly. Okay, but you can't just make decisions like this. There's a process. And honestly, I think you're overreacting. Brian made some mistakes, but that doesn't mean I should lose my job over it. Daniel cocks his head. You think this is just about Brian? Megan stiffens. Daniel turns to the employees behind the counter. How long has this been going on? They hesitate. Then, the young Latina barista clears her throat. A while. Her voice is small, but steady. Brian, he's always been like that. He gets complaints all the time, but Megan never does anything. Megan spins around. Maria, don't. Maria lifts her chin, standing her ground. You don't. Daniel nods encouragingly. Go on. Maria glances at Megan, then continues. He treats black customers worse. Sometimes it's little things, ignoring them at the register, acting annoyed when they ask for something. But sometimes it's worse. He's refused to remake drinks before. Said things under his breath. Once, a black delivery driver came in to pick up an order, and Brian accused him of stealing before even asking his name. Megan's face flushes red. That's not true. Another employee, Emily, the girl at the pastry station, shifts uncomfortably. It is true. Megan whips around, eyes wild. You never said anything. Emily shrugs, voice barely above a whisper. Would you have listened? Silence. Megan's breath quickens. Okay, fine. Maybe Brian had issues, but that doesn't mean I. Daniel holds up a hand, cutting her off. Megan. Stop. She falls silent. Daniel slowly turns his phone screen toward her. Let's check the security footage. Megan's face drops. What? She stammers. Daniel taps the screen. Every cafe in this chain has remote access to their security system. I've been watching the live feed from corporate while we've been standing here. He swipes through timestamps. Let's see. Here's Brian ignoring a black customer at the register. Here's him rolling his eyes when the woman asked for oat milk. And, oh look, here's you standing right there, doing nothing. Megan takes a step back, shaking her head rapidly. Wait, no. That's not fair. You don't understand how busy it gets. I can't catch everything. Daniel's gaze doesn't waver. You caught it. You chose to ignore it. Megan's breathing is uneven now. Panic flickers in her eyes. She can feel the ground shifting under her, feel the walls closing in. I can fix this, she blurts out, desperation creeping into her voice. I'll do a training. We can talk about inclusivity, make some new policies. Daniel's expression hardens. We already have policies. You just didn't follow them. Megan swallows. Her voice drops to a whisper. Please. I need this job. Daniel studies her for a long moment. He's not a cruel man. But he also knows that Megan's only begging because she's been caught. If she'd had her way, Brian would still be working here. Customers would still be mistreated. And none of this would have changed. I don't fire people lightly, Daniel finally says. But I also don't keep managers who allow discrimination under their watch. Megan's lip trembles. Daniel's voice is firm, final. You're fired. Megan gasps. No, wait. Daniel turns to the employees. Who's the assistant manager? Maria raises her hand hesitantly. Daniel nods. You're in charge now. At least for the interim. I'll be back next week to evaluate how things are running. Maria's eyes widen. Me? But... You stood up, Daniel says simply. That's the kind of leadership this cafe needs. Megan lets out a choked sob, covering her mouth. This isn't fair, she whispers. Daniel looks at her one last time. No, he says softly. What wasn't fair was every black customer who walked in here and was treated like less. That's what's not fair. Megan doesn't have an answer for that. Daniel turns away from her, facing the cafe. The customers are still watching. Some of them nod approvingly. A few even smile. Justice has been served. But Daniel isn't here for applause. He's here to make sure this never happens again. Megan doesn't leave right away. She stands frozen behind the counter, as if hoping Daniel will change his mind. As if the reality of what just happened hasn't fully sunk in yet. But then, the weight of the moment crashes over her. Her face crumples. Without another word, she rips off her name tag and storms out of the cafe, her footsteps sharp against the tile. When the door swings shut behind her, it feels like a chapter closing. The tension in the cafe evaporates. Daniel exhales, turning to the employees. "All right. Let's get back to work." The baristas blink, still processing. Then Maria, still wide-eyed, steps forward. What do we do about Megan's shifts?" Daniel smiles. "We'll figure it out. Right now, I just want to make sure this cafe gets back on track." Maria hesitates, then nods. "Okay." The atmosphere begins to shift. Employees move with more energy, more confidence. Customers start murmuring, some in shock, others in quiet approval. The black woman who ordered the oat milk latte catches Daniel's eye and gives him a small, knowing nod. Then, applause. This time, it's not hesitant. It's loud. Genuine. The teenage boy, still holding his half-finished frappé, claps the hardest. "That was awesome," he grins. Daniel chuckles, shaking his head. "I just did what needed to be done." The boy tilts his head. People don't always do what needs to be done. Daniel's smile fades slightly. He knows that too well. A few customers approach, thanking him. One woman, a local teacher, shakes her head in disbelief. "I've been coming here for years. I always felt like something was off, but I didn't want to assume." A middle-aged man chimes in. "Me too. I should have said something sooner." Daniel nods, his expression unreadable. He doesn't let them off the hook with comforting words. Instead, he lets the weight of their silence settle. Because silence is what allows this kind of thing to thrive. They shift, uncomfortable, but thoughtful. That's enough for now. The aftermath is swift. By the next morning, word has spread. A viral clip surfaces. Someone in the cafe had recorded the confrontation, and it's already making waves online. The headline is brutal. "Racist employee fired by undercover CEO. Manager gets what she deserves." The footage doesn't just show Brian's hostility, it captures Megan's complicity. Her reluctance to intervene. The moment she realized she had lost. Corporate sees it. By noon, an official statement is released. "We stand firmly against discrimination. The actions at our cafe do not reflect our company's values. We have taken swift action to ensure a safer, more inclusive environment." But the real punishment isn't in the statement. It's in the fallout. Brian, the former employee, finds himself blacklisted from every cafe and restaurant in town. No one wants to hire someone with that kind of reputation. His social media blows up with backlash. His excuses, "It wasn't that serious. People are too sensitive," fall on deaf ears. Megan, meanwhile, is humiliated. She applies for other managerial positions, but word travels fast. No company wants to take on someone who ignored racial discrimination in her own store. Her name is now a warning, not a recommendation. 1 week later, Daniel returns to the cafe. It's different now. Livelier. Warmer. Customers are greeted with genuine smiles. The employees move freely, no longer weighed down by the tension that once clung to the space. Maria, now officially the interim manager, greets Daniel at the counter. "We've had more customers this week than ever," she says. "People actually want to come here now." Daniel nods, taking it all in. "Good." He glances around and spots the teenager from before, sipping a frappé in the corner. When their eyes meet, the boy grins and gives him a thumbs up. Daniel smirks. This isn't just about firing a racist employee. It's about shifting a culture. Ensuring that no black customer has to prove they deserve kindness. That no employee has to work under someone who enables discrimination. It's about making change last. Daniel turns back to Maria. "Keep it up," he says. "I'll be watching." And with that, he takes his coffee, freshly brewed, perfectly made, and walks out. Justice isn't just served. It's felt.